Hello, everyone. My name is Sadie Waddington, and I'm the Communications and Outreach Director at Coastal Quest. I will be facilitating today's webinar. Our presentation is part of Coastal Quest's Learning Network, which includes a series of webinars and resources which you can explore on Coastal Quest's website. The purpose of our webinars is to learn about different approaches to nature-based solutions and to provide coastal projects that are multi-benefit, community-driven, and equitable. The Learning Network is a space where practitioners can hear from experts and practitioners can participate in a wide range of topics and case studies to accelerate Coastal 30 by 30 efforts. This includes coastal protection, restoration, as well as increasing connectivity, improvements to water quality, reducing climate risk, and access to nature. Today, we'll be learning about how we can achieve Coastal 30 by 30 in a shifting landscape.
We'll be kicking off today's topic with a presentation from our first speaker, Sylvia Troost from the Pew Charitable Trust, where she is a project director, U.S. Conservation. Sylvia Troost works on natural climate solutions with an emphasis on coastal blue carbon and other wetland habitats, also resiliency planning and federal coastal policy. Her portfolio includes advancing nature-based approaches to climate mitigation. She previously supported Pew's coastal habitat and oceans conservation work through strategic planning, operations, budgets, and campaign management. Sylvia will be speaking with us about coastal conservation in a shifting landscape from a national perspective. Sylvia, if you'd go ahead and share your screen, I'll stop sharing. And over to you.
Okay. All right.
And go ahead and go full screen.
All right.
There we go.
You're seeing the presentation?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sylvia.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, let me just move the picture here. Okay, well, thank you so much. A big thanks to the Coastal Quest team for inviting me to participate in this panel. And I'm really excited to share the panel with some wonderful presentations from California. So as Sadie said, I'm Sylvia Troost. I'm a project director with the Pew Charitable Trust U.S. Conservation Program. And I'm going to speak pretty briefly and at a high level about kind of coastal conservation and what's happening nationally and federally. And I want to note that this is by no means an exhaustive overview, and I, don't have my pulse on everything, but I think from my perch here in the Washington, D.C. area and with Pew, I can provide some perspectives that'll offer some context, the broader context that then we can then shift to hear about specific place-based efforts that are happening in California. All right, so a little bit about the Pew Charitable Trust. We are an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization dedicated to advancing sound public policy, informing the public, and invigorating civic life. We work in 3 general areas, including government performance, public health, and environment. We also have a dedicated program in Philadelphia where the Pew family has specific connections. And we also have the Pew Research Center, which does public opinion surveys. So our environment portfolio includes work both internationally and within the US. And as I mentioned, I work for our US conservation program, which focuses on advancing policies and plans to help ecosystems and communities adapt to a changing environment. All right, so I was asked to talk a bit about the national policy context, but I thought it was important to start with an acknowledgement. When we're talking about a shifting federal landscape, we're also talking about a shifting landscape in the ecosystem itself. So as we all know, we are undergoing tremendous change in our coastal landscapes. Impacts like rising sea levels, which are drowning coastal wetlands, saltwater intrusion, coastal erosion. All of these are heavily impacting our coastal landscapes. These are dynamic systems in and of themselves, but change is happening on an increasing scale, particularly where I sit here on the East Coast, where we're seeing a lot of change to our coastal environments. And obviously this has impacts to communities and the resources that we rely upon for things like coastal fisheries, tourism, et cetera. So the picture here on the slide, I think, is a good illustration of this. This is a picture from Cape Hatteras National Seashore in North Carolina. And you'll see here kind of an eroding shoreline. There's some attempts to kind of stabilize that with some placement of rocks. You'll see in the distance some coastal ghost forests. And this is a phenomenon here in many East Coast states where with rising sea levels and saltwater intrusion, coastal forests are dying and creating these ghost forests. So I think this is a good snapshot of this changing coastlines. And with that, kind of the notion that kind of traditional protected area approaches may not work, like a traditional draw a line around an area, because we really are thinking about a changing landscape. A coastal scientist once kind of described this to me using a duck hunting analogy, where you don't aim where the duck is, you aim where the duck is going. So when we think about coastal protection, we need to think about where the habitat's going to be in the future and where can we protect those areas to facilitate habitat migration. How about removing barriers to water and sediment flows more upstream to help benefit downstream habitats? So this really kind of necessitates looking at a kind of a landscape and watershed level and thinking more expansively and different tools about coastal protection. All right, so turning to the federal policy environment, I don't think anyone listening to this webinar will be surprised to know that we are in a challenging federal policy environment right now. We're in a very kind of polarized, politicized context where even issues like 30 by 30 can become quite politicized. In addition, we have significant cuts in federal funding, downsizing of federal programs, loss of federal agency staff. So we're losing a lot of capacity at the federal level, which really poses some challenges and headwinds for coastal protection. Increasingly, we're seeing the burden for resource protection really shift to states. And in this resource-constrained environment, states are faced with competing uses. There's issues, really important issues like affordable housing. There's the energy grid, things like that, that are all kind of competing in our coastal landscapes, and states have to navigate this in a very challenging environment. So I think in some instances, the framing around 30 by 30 may not be as useful as really framing coastal protection around specific benefits that can be provided to communities. So things like flood protection, coastal erosion protection, things like that. So I don't want to minimize what is an incredibly challenging policy environment right now. Of course, right now the government is closed. We don't have a FY26 budget yet, federal budget. So definitely very challenging. That said, nature conservation and coastal conservation are generally broadly supported nonpartisan issues. And federally, we do see evidence of this. So for example, with specific appropriation bills that were making their way through Congress and committees, we are seeing restoration of funding for key coastal programs that support things like the National Estuary Program, the National Estuarine Research Reserve programs, coastal zone management grants. And though this funding is not at the levels that we need, it's certainly not the same kind of draconian cuts that we're seeing before. And so I do think this is kind of a bright spot. In addition, we do see continued bipartisan bills being introduced in Congress related to coastal conservation and coastal science. For example, the Estuaries Act was introduced in a bipartisan fashion to reauthorize the National Estuary Program, and we have the Digital Coast Act to help fund those key digital coast programs out of NOAA. We even recently saw the creation of a new bipartisan Senate caucus focused on stewardship, the Senate Stewardship Caucus, and this caucus will focus on public lands. So again, even in this challenging federal policy environment, we do see continued bipartisan support for coastal conservation issues. Now, at the state level, many states, and you'll hear about California today, are definitely taking the lead in terms of coastal 30 by 30 and coastal conservation. California, for example, Maryland, Massachusetts. In addition, the concept of conserving natural and working lands. So thinking about traditional conservation for nature benefits, but also working lands and the role that working lands can support in keeping those working lands as working lands. This concept is tends to get traction in states, no matter the political leanings. And for example, South Carolina has a goal to conserve 10 million acres of their natural and working lands, which is, I believe, approximately 50% of the state. So what I'm seeing here in the DC area in terms of issues that continue to enjoy broad bipartisan support are kind of two things. And one, kind of place-based efforts. So that's how I have here the power of places. So even during changes in administration and whatnot, place-based programs really can continue moving forward and enjoying bipartisan support. A couple of examples here, and these aren't necessarily federal programs, but are multi-state programs, are the Atlantic Conservation Coalition. So the Atlantic Conservation Coalition, is a partnership between East Coast states and nonprofits working together to protect and restore coastal habitats, peatlands, and coastal forests, and in Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. We also have, as a good example of the power of place-based efforts continuing forward, is the South Atlantic Salt Marsh Initiative, or SASME. And this is an effort that Pew is very involved in. So SASME is a regional collaborative, including federal and state agencies and communities and NGOs, dedicated to conserving the approximately 1 million acres of salt marsh that span from the coastal North Carolina all the way to the northeast coast of Florida. And together, this collaborative has developed a plan that they're now implementing that's focusing on measures such as protecting marsh migration space and removing barriers to restore connectivity to these coastal habitats. Another concept that also enjoys support across the political spectrum is this notion of nature as infrastructure. We continue to see momentum around nature-based solutions around the country. For example, living shorelines, dune restoration, and wetland restoration. And of course, for these many benefits that these nature-based solutions provide, such as erosion control, flood protection, et cetera. And nature-based solutions and nature as infrastructure is also a promising area for public-private partnerships, which increasingly are even more important in this resource-constrained environment. So an example of that is U.S. Fish and Wildlife has partnered with Duke University in North Carolina to develop a national project registry of shovel-ready nature-based solutions projects with the intent to allow philanthropic interests or the private sector who are interested in investing in nature-based solutions to have kind of a one-stop shop where they can put money into these important projects. All right, so in closing, while at the federal level, the specific 30 by 30 framing may not have the same traction in some contexts, we do continue to see both support and action around conserving coastal landscapes and really building broad-based support around specific places, as well as identifying conservation measures that leverage ecosystem services and benefits to communities are areas that continue to maintain traction even in these challenging policy times. So with that, I'll stop here. Thanks again for listening. Look forward to the discussion, and I will hand it over to my colleagues in California.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. That was fantastic. I'm going to go ahead and take back sharing of the screen to introduce our next. If you want to unshare there. There we go. Okay. Perfect. Thank you so much. That was really informative and also inspiring to hear all those different opportunities and work that's going on the bipartisan level. Really, some really great advancements and ways to approach it. So our next speaker is Evan. Evan, welcome back. We're delighted to have Evan back. Evan Borges Sloan, Deputy Executive Officer from the California State Coastal Conservancy. Evan has been working at the Conservancy for 11 years, focusing on multi-benefit wetland restoration and living shoreline projects. At the Conservancy, she has managed coastal restoration, sea level rise adaptation projects all across Southern California and the San Francisco Bay. And she's known to be a lover of sediment for wetland restoration and shoreline resilience. So we're going to go ahead and share Evan's slide for us. So I will stop sharing. And Marianne, if you could go ahead and launch, and we'll be able to advance those on your behalf. Evan, let us know when you're ready.
Thank you so much. That's my second slide, but I don't mind starting on it. The first slide just basically says my name. So thank you for that introduction, Sadie. Appreciate it. I'm Evan Borgness Sloan, Deputy Executive Officer at the State Coastal Conservancy. I'm very happy to be here. I'll start quickly by highlighting the primary source of new funding that many state agencies will be using to achieve 30 by 30, which is the 2024 climate bond. But before I go into the bond, I'm not going to focus on this, but wanted to highlight that even though federal agencies supporting 30 by 30, as we heard from Sylvia, are getting heavily cut, there are some opportunities still out there. Sylvia mentioned some coastal programs that have maintained funding. And one of those, surprisingly, is EPA's geographic programs. So in California, that means EPA's San Francisco Bay geographic program has maintained funding. And when the government reopens, they will be releasing a notice of funding opportunity using remaining FY24 and 25 funds. So just wanted to highlight that opportunity quickly since the federal opportunities are dwindling for funding. Next slide. All right, so the 2024 climate bond, also known as Prop 4, was approved by voters in November of 2024. It provides $10 billion for natural resources and climate activities. The $10 billion is divided among program areas such as clean water, fire resilience, biodiversity, and coastal resilience. For achieving 30 by 30, some of the agencies with climate bond funds include the Wildlife Conservation Board, Coastal Conservancy, Ocean Protection Council, and you'll be hearing from Shri next, California Natural Resources Agency, other conservancies, as well as the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. For coastal resilience, there is 1.2 billion in the bond, and a majority of that will be coming to the Conservancy for distribution through grants and contracts. Next slide. For the current fiscal year, FY25, the Coastal Conservancy received approximately 255 million. And that's if you include our wildfire funding. For people who are actually tracking these bills, technically we got that at the end of FY24, but I put it on this slide to highlight a few pots within this year's budget where we received 34 million for dam removal. So that includes the Matilaha Dam, Potter Valley Dam in the north. We received 33 million for coastal flood protection, 46 million for coastal resilience, 31 million for wildfire resilience, as well as 50 million for the Great Redwood Trail. And so this is our, first allotment of Prop 4 funding, and we will continue to be receiving appropriations for the next 5 to 10 years for this bond. Next slide. Prop 4 grants are a bit delayed as the bond did not include an Administrative Procedure Act exemption like all other bonds our agency has received in the past. So with that, there was an accompanying bill to Prop 4 that allows agencies to do an emergency rulemaking process. We are currently working on our emergency regulations, and if approved, we will be able to start bringing Prop 4 projects to our board in February. Wildfire projects had a separate bill, as I mentioned, an early action bill. That bill did have an exemption for this act, the Administrative Procedures Act. So we'll be moving forward with those projects at our November 20th board meeting. Next slide. So applications are now open and have been open all year. We have a one big rolling grant process. So that means there aren't deadlines, there aren't RFPs. It is always open. It is a two-step process. You submit a pre-application and a full application as a second step if requested. And I'm not going to go into the details on how to access those funds, but please, there's tons of information on our website, especially at our grants page, which is linked here. Next slide. So to demonstrate our work on 30 by 30, I'll be focusing on how the Conservancy is leading and working with partners such as nonprofits, tribes, academic institutions, and local agencies to test, implement, and scale up nature-based sea level rise adaptation projects across the coast. Today, I'll provide examples from our top priority nature-based sea level rise adaptation projects, including tidal wetland restoration. As Sadie mentioned in my intro, I love sediment, so you'll see a lot of cool new approaches to use dredge sediments and upland soils for tidal wetland restoration and resilience. I'll also be talking about native oysters and eelgrass, as well as dune restoration and some of our new green-gray solutions. Next slide. In San Francisco Bay, so starting with tidal wetlands, in San Francisco Bay, we're co-leading with many partners the largest West Coast wetland restoration project called the South Bay Salt Pond Restoration Project. Phase 1 of this was completed in 2016, which restored 3,750 acres of habitat and created 7 miles of new trails and other public access features. Phase 2 of the restoration project is currently underway with construction starting in 2019. And once phase 2 is done, we will have restored over 3,350 acres of habitat restoration and created 6 miles of new trails. In this photo, you're seeing one project that was a part of the South Bay Salt Pond acquisition, a related project called the South San Francisco Bay Shoreline Project. And here, the Coastal Conservancy partnered with the Army Corps of Engineers to implement a large-scale wetland restoration, flood risk management, and public access project. Just this month, we finished building the first 2 miles of levee. And in this photo, you can see the levee under construction. Next slide. We have also been working to test other nature-based solutions, sometimes being the first seed funder on these novel approaches. One example is a project where we applied to a special program within the Army Corps so that the San Francisco district could receive Corps funds to test out novel uses of dredge material. This project took 90,000 cubic yards of dredge material and placed it in the subtidal areas adjacent to wetlands. So adjacent to a site called Eden Landing in our central San Francisco Bay. That material was placed in December of last year. This project tested how the natural tides and currents would bring that sediment into the shoreline. The monitoring took place throughout this year, and the incoming results have been promising, with sediment reaching the shoreline and even within the adjacent marshes. This will be a more cost-effective method for beneficially reusing dredge sediment, and it was the first of its kind on the West Coast. Next slide.
Evan, sorry to pause. We're having a little bit of a technical issue. I'm going to move us to the the PDF, and we'll do slides on that in just a minute. Sorry, it's the slides aren't loading in the same way that we expected. If you want to keep speaking through, and I will join you as soon as I can with the visuals. How's that?
Okay. I'm just curious. Do you know when it hopped off?
Marianne, could you speak to that?
It was just the last slide on the dredging.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So really pretty picture of a scow, so that's okay. Moving to the next example, we were one of the first supporters of the Seal Beach Sediment Augmentation Project, where the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service sprayed dredge sediment over an existing sinking salt marsh to raise elevations in the face of sea level rise. This project has many lessons learned and can be utilized for future projects. And this one was also the first of its kind on the West Coast. So the Seal Beach project is the next slide. The one you're looking at was the project where we placed dredge material in the subtidal zone. Next slide. There's the Seal Beach spraying the dredge sediment. Next slide, and then we're caught up. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank
So the
you.
Coastal Conservancy is utilizing more than dredge sediment for sea level rise adaptation and wetland restoration. We're also looking for opportunities to utilize upland soils. For instance, as a part of the South Bay Salt Pond project, we utilize clean soil for nearby construction projects for building berms, ecotone levees, habitat islands that serve as flood protection and have habitat benefits. This photo is Pond A2W in the city of Mountain View, where we're moving soil across a perimeter levee using a conveyor belt and then building habitat islands using traditional excavators. Next slide. Moving on to dune restoration, the Surfers Point Managed Retreat Project was phase 1 was completed in 2012, which was approximately 900 feet long, moving infrastructure inland, parking, bike path, and restoring native dune habitat. It was a unique design with a buried cobble berm that could get exposed during winter large storm events, which helps protect the back dunes and the pedestrian pathway. The cobbles that were underneath can get naturally buried with sand in the summer months, and it's been performing really well. Surfers Point Phase 2 is currently under construction, hoping to be completed this month. Phase 2 will restore 2.5 acres of dunes, approximately 900 feet long, moving infrastructure again 60 to 130 feet inland. Dune revegetation will be led by Surfrider after the contractor construction is completed. In this photo, you can see phase 1 at the top. This is a really recent photo. So you see the before for phase 2 in the south and the after, where they've already covered the cobble berm with sand and built the pedestrian pathway. And next to come, obviously, will be the vegetation and completing building the parking. That's just inland of that. Next slide. Moving on to native oysters and eelgrass, the Conservancy has been testing living shoreline designs over the past 10 years across coastal California. We've tested native oyster and eelgrass approaches in San Rafael, Hayward, Richmond, San Diego, and Upper Newport Bay. And a new project to highlight is we're currently working to scale this work up in San Francisco Bay with designing and permitting 10 living shoreline projects at the same time across the bay as a part of the Regionally Advancing Living Shorelines project. Next slide. Moving towards the gray side, we're also increasing habitat benefits of rock revetments with rocky intertidal restoration strategies such as fucus transplant or rockweed, a type of algae, as well as crown plantings with wetland upland plant species in San Francisco Bay. So this photo is showing you one of those enhanced rock slopes at Terminal 4 in Richmond, California. Next slide. So with these examples, I hope you can see that the Conservancy's nature-based adaptation projects are multi-benefit and typically include all 3 of the primary objectives of 30 by 30, protecting and restoring biodiversity, expanding access to nature with all of our pedestrian paths and trails that are associated with our restoration projects, as well as mitigating and building resilience to climate change. Next slide. In terms of what needs to be done to scale up, I think state agencies can work together to utilize the programmatic permitting pathways that have been developed. If you haven't heard, CDFW has a new restoration management permit, which is amazing. They just launched it this year. It bundles nearly every CDFW authorization, including take and lake and street bed alterations. There's also the Water Board's general order for habitat restoration, which can get you CEQA coverage and your 401 permits. So really utilizing and talking about these pathways. We can also institutionalize others. There are temporary pathways such as CDFW's statutory exemption for restoration projects, which can get you CEQA coverage as well as develop new ones. I think we should be continuing to test new nature-based approaches. Do we have a problem? I'm
Nope.
done.
No,
Okay.
no, you're absolutely fine. Keep going.
Okay.
Apologies.
Yeah, we just continue to test new approaches. As Sylvia mentioned, we are working with a dynamic shoreline that is facing a lot of different stressors, and each site has its own unique challenges. So we need to continue testing. And then also, I think that funders like myself, like the Coastal Conservancy, can improve coordination, aligning grant making processes, sharing applications, and coordinating funding. And then my last slide is just my email address. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Evan, for battling through that with us. Appreciate it. I'm going to stop sharing here. Pull that down. That was really so many different opportunities to look into, and we added into the chat a couple links for people to explore. Please take a look at those. Some really great information, a very informative site there. So I'm going to share screen again myself. Here we go. So I'm seeing some great questions popping up in our Q&A platform. Please go ahead and add your questions in there. And as we're going along, speakers, if you see something that resonates with you and you'd like to respond, please feel free to do so. We can do that verbally later on in our Q&A session as well if there's something that you'd like to share with the whole group. Great. So I'd like to introduce our third speaker. And so Srija, let me just put this here. Sorry, I've got to reorg my screen a little bit. Srija joined OPC in September 2022. She is the Coastal Habitats Program Manager at the California Ocean Protection Council. Prior to that, she earned her MAS degree in marine biodiversity and conservation from Scripps Institute of Oceanography, where she graduated work focusing on coastal management. Before that, Sri had a whole other career working in the pharmaceutical industry for over a decade as a scientist and team leader after receiving her PhD in bioengineering from MIT. She enjoys spending time with her family, is an avid gardener and aquarist, and loves being in and around the ocean. Sri, I'm going to go ahead and give you access to share your screen. Go ahead and share your slides. And go ahead and go into presentation mode.
All right. How does that look?
It looks great. Over to you. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for the introduction. And it was great to hear the other speakers today. My name is Srija Gopal, and I'm with California Ocean Protection Council, or OPC, serving as the Coastal Habitats Program Manager. OPC is a cabinet-level state agency tasked with protecting, conserving, and maintaining California's ocean and marine resources. Very happy to be here to share some thoughts on achieving 30 by 30 from a framework perspective in California's coastal waters. And I also wanted to touch a little bit on a nexus with blue carbon habitats. It's one of elements of my portfolio, so I wanted to talk about that. So for today, I'll just give a broad refresher on OPC's roadmap to achieving 30 by 30. Talk about the blue carbon, and then share a status of where we are with evaluation of the coastal habitats as it pertains to the 30 by 30 status and what the path forward looks like. Wanted to ground ourselves in California's 30 by 30 goal. So something that many of you might be familiar with, maybe some of you are not. But in 2020, Governor Newsom issued an executive order committing California to conserving 30% of its lands and waters by 2030. So 2 years later, the California Natural Resources Agency released this document, Pathways to 30 by 30, which defines what these conservation areas could look like and establishes 10 pathways for achieving 30 by 30. And this pathways document defines 30 by 30 conservation areas as land and coastal waters that are durably protected, principally for biodiversity benefits. And so, there are two elements that the definition talks about. One is the durable protection, and second is the biodiversity benefit. So durable refers to areas that have gone through formal processes that can't be easily undone. For example, California's Marine Protected Area Network, which is established through Fish and Game Code, would meet this criterion, while a temporary or a seasonal fisheries closure, something like that, would not. The second part of the definition, managed principally for biodiversity benefit, that's a little more complex. As noted in Pathways, 30 by 30 can take on many forms, and this is something that Evan had alluded to as well. And different types of areas have very different management plans and use different metrics to evaluate their biodiversity benefits. For coastal waters, we're building this big tent, all-inclusive movement, and that means that 30 by 30 conservation areas can include formal MPAs that I mentioned earlier, and these are actually set aside for conservation, but also elements like tribal stewardship areas, as well as marine managed areas that are not formally MPAs, but still achieve significant biodiversity benefits. So those are the three categories that I talk about here on this slide. And for the last piece, for coastal waters that contain designations that are not MPAs, such areas would be evaluated on a case-by-case basis for inclusion into 30 by 30. So for example, in coastal waters, that could include something like coastal portions of University of California natural reserves, which restrict recreational and commercial activity in order to make undisturbed lands and waters available for research and teaching. So back in June, the Ocean Protection Council, the council adopted a roadmap to achieving 30 by 30 in coastal waters that builds on the pathways to 30 by 30 and applies California's strong definition of conservation area to coastal waters. So the roadmap formally recognizes those different types of coastal and marine areas that I just discussed as conservation areas. And with these efforts, it brings the total area of coastal waters conserved by end of this year to 21.9%. And the last piece here, exploring the role of coastal and marine designation is something I'll talk about a little bit further along the talk. All right. So from an evaluation process perspective, OPC has made determinations and shared that with the public regarding all fully and highly protected MPAs and all minimally protected MPAs using MPA guide assessments available on the MPA Atlas. We've also determined that the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary, which is a flagship example of tribal stewardship area in California's coastal water, qualifies as a 30 by 30 conservation area. And finally, OPC has conducted an initial very high-level review of non-MPA areas, resulting in the qualification of the oceans portion of the UC natural reserves as a conservation area. So this is what is reflected in the 21.9% that I just alluded to earlier. And moving forward, right, OPC will now begin evaluating lightly protected MPAs and non-MPA areas using the criteria outlined in our staff recommendation at our September council meeting, which is also available to the public for taking a look. And one of these areas, for example, that may qualify as a 30 by 30 conservation area, pending further evaluation, could be something like the state water quality protection areas. And on that note, I'm going to pivot to a topic that's really core to OPC's work on conservation of coastal habitats, and that's exploring the role of these habitats, specifically blue carbon habitats and ecosystems, coastal wetlands primarily, in biodiversity and meeting the state's climate goals. So as many of you are aware, these habitats help sequester greenhouse gases and are essential for climate mitigation. And it's one of the nature-based solutions that we talked about earlier. In this context, blue carbon ecosystems as a land type is in the context of the work that California Air Resources Board, or CARB, which develops a scoping plan every 5 years. And the scoping plan serves as the state's roadmap for mitigating climate change. Like, how do we get to carbon neutrality in a specific time frame that CARB is mandated to put out there. So CARB is also working to understand how coastal ecosystems, such as coastal wetlands, can be integrated into the state's carbon inventories. And a key step is developing the data and models to do this kind of inventorying and modeling. So in this context, OPC has been working closely with state partners, including CARB, to support their efforts on statewide natural and working lands carbon inventory and modeling. I'll talk a little bit more about it in the next couple of slides. So as I mentioned earlier, CARB is the state's lead climate mitigation agency and is tasked with tracking the state's progress to meet its target of achieving carbon neutrality by 2045. And on this slide, you can see a simple equation that describes how CARB thinks about carbon neutrality. So the way you achieve neutrality is when you have a balance between the sources and sinks, correct? So there is the first bucket in there is the AB32 sources, is example from sources from fossil fuels, landfills, dairies, things like that. And then there is a natural and working lands emissions from these, which could be a source or a sink. Natural and working lands include multiple land types like wetlands, eelgrass, agricultural lands, sparsely vegetated lands, and these could be, plus or minus the NWL emissions, and minus any other sequestration, such as a direct air capture or something along those lines. So these elements would add to equal to or less than zero. That's the goal with the whole carbon neutrality target. So the lands, as I said, to contribute to calculate the contribution of the lands towards carbon neutrality, CARB must assess the effects of climate. There's wildfire impacts, there's droughts, pathogens. There are so many elements that can affect the performance and the emissions from the natural and working lands, and anything else that really impacts plants and soil carbon through the inventory. So that's the inventory that we are trying to support CARB in getting some of these data sets and models up and ready to go. So for coastal wetlands, soils comprise a majority of their total carbon stock. The carbon is stored in the coastal wetland soils, right? So when modeling soil carbon, a substantial amount of data is required to calibrate and validate these models. So there is a publicly aggregated data set, which is a Coastal Carbon Atlas. This is published by the Smithsonian, and this synthesizes wetland soil core data for broader use in models. So if you see this figure here, the colored circles denote the current number of wetland soil cores available in different regions across the state. But you can see that between coastal and delta wetlands, there are about 350 soil cores available, but their distribution is really skewed, and you can see that most of the data sets are heavily concentrated in the San Francisco Bay in the Delta region, which is really data rich, and that's been really great. But the southern coast or northern coastal wetlands, we have a paucity of data. So this is going to be a really valuable effort moving forward, collecting data sets for these regions of the state. Another effort that CARB is engaged in that we have been partnering with is also quantifying greenhouse gas emissions from coastal wetlands. For calibration and validation of the gas emissions, CARB uses these towers called eddy covariance towers, EC towers. So they measure landscape scale fluxes, providing critical data sets for quantifying carbon dioxide and methane exchange from coastal wetlands. So the picture that you see on the right is an example of an EC tower, which can continuously measure these exchanges across different tidal cycles and seasons and times. So in California, there are eddy covariance towers, and we have one in the Delta, one in San Francisco Bay, and a few in the Elkhorn Slough. However, there are no publicly available EC data for coastal wetlands outside of these areas. So this somewhat limits CARB's ability to quantify and verify fluxes in other regions. And in response to this, CARB's board just recently approved a new research contract to improve these emission estimates from Southern California wetlands. So we're going to have a new EC tower and soil core collection in the Southern California region. And the hope is that this will enhance modeling under CARB's NWL inventory and NWL scoping plan programs. And it'll be publicly available, and there will be opportunities to contribute to this effort to support other research questions. Next steps from our end, results of OPC's evaluation will be shared next year at the June 2026 council meeting and included in the next annual Pathways Progress Report. And in general, if anyone's really interested in following the whole 30 by 30 effort along, a council meeting webpage is a great place to access some of these materials. You can see the history of where things have been, and this the evaluation that will be presented will drive significant progress on key strategies outlined in the roadmap. It'll also result in the development of recommendations to strengthen protections where necessary. OPC will also be looking into at our blue carbon ecosystems through the lens of climate change, and continue to collaborate with state partners, statewide practitioners, and CARB on these efforts as well. And with that, I want to thank you for the opportunity today. If you have any questions, happy to address them.
Thank you so much, Sri. That was action-packed. Lots of amazing things taking place. Thank you so much for sharing. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And we have our closing speaker today, Tegan Hoffman, the Executive Director for Coastal Quest. And after our final speaker, please stay on. We have some questions that are popping up in our Q&A. We'd love to address some of those, as well as a few facilitated questions. This is an opportunity for the audience to engage with these experts from the field. So let me introduce Tegan Hoffman, Executive Director for Coastal Quest. Tegan has over 25 years of experience in coastal and ocean conservation and resource management, and is one of Coastal Quest's founding members. Tegan has extensive know-how in designing, developing, and launching projects, programs, and institutions for private foundation, public agency, and nonprofit organizations. She has authored several publications and received numerous awards and research grants for her work on conservation, resource management, and building local conservation capacity in the wilder Caribbean, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific from organizations such as NOAA, NFWF, NIFWF, the U.S. EPA Star Fellowship, the University of California's Pacific Rim Research Program, and the U.S.-Indonesia Society. Tegan, go ahead and share your screen and present your slides.
Great. Can you see my screen, Sadie?
I can.
Great. Well, welcome everyone. It's so awesome to see so many people attend today, and thank you for the three great speakers we already heard from. Super exciting opportunities. And I did just want to connect a few dots on the CARB piece, hoping to get this inventory set on blue carbon so that blue carbon ecosystems can receive more support and funding from the CARB cap and trade dollars in the future. So that's an exciting opportunity for all of us to keep track of. Anyway, today I'm going to tell you a little bit about our Coastal Accelerator program. And first, I'm going to share what we've heard from many of you, because we are a user-driven program, so to speak. We like to hear from our partners about what your needs are, what your challenges are, and then meet your needs and help support and lift up the work, incredible work you guys are all doing. So over the summer, we did do a funding priority survey, and we reached out to our 450 plus subscribers to our coastal funding database. We'll talk about that in a minute, but if you haven't signed up for that, you should. And I know Marianne will put a link into that. But we heard from almost 25% of our participants and subscribers representing various parts of California and the US. And we heard that 72% experienced a disruption in federal funding since January. We also heard that people's funding was canceled, it might have been paused, and there were delays. And we know that that was just, it's been really, really challenging. And that 80% had also experienced a funding loss and couldn't find an alternative source to complete their work. We also heard that people have been changing their scopes of work, their priorities in response to the current funding landscape and priorities, and that half of the respondents kind of were thinking through and shared with us how they are, how they're changing their work, how they're describing their work differently, how they're writing about their work in a way that is more about workforce development, about working lands, about resilience and disaster resilience, as well as reducing climate risk. And so you heard about that from Sylvia as well. So it's aligned there. And that we also heard that the greatest need was focused on needing more philanthropic funding, more capacity support, and bridge funding between public grants, as well as grant writing support. And so, we taking this all in, we thought with our learning network that this topic around how, what are the opportunities? How can we get behind some initiatives and reframe our work to be successful was really going to be exciting and motivating. And the coast is a wonderful place to do that because it is really managed by coastal waters, our state waters, and coastal lands are our local jurisdictions, private property owners. So there's lots of great opportunities to still do all this amazing work that we do. And so we were able to successfully secure funding to launch our it's one of our six cohorts for our Coastal Accelerator program. And I thought that I would just spend a little bit of time highlighting some of the work that we've done with partners and supporting them over the years. And so what we do is we really focused on addressing the challenge of supporting projects and partners in coastal regions where land and sea connect, where the coast and ocean connect, and are often underfunded and fragmented and lacking some coordination at times, and in need of technical support and some capital to turn some ideas and community-driven efforts into multi-benefit projects. And we surveyed hundreds of practitioners over the past years. Many of you have participated in this to really understand and learn what would help lift up your project. And what we heard repeatedly was needing support with seed funding, technical assistance to help with building partnerships, as well as planning and securing funding. And so we have put together a program and some training and cohorts to help achieve those goals. We've also been starting to help with the permitting as projects progress. And so this accelerator program is continuing to grow and be successful in supporting these efforts on the ground. And so this accelerator program, our goal is to support 10 projects. We have a current RFP open in the Pacific region. And then we also will do a small pilot in the Caribbean in the spring, which we'll be announcing later next year. And the goal is to really build coastal resilience and help meet 30 by 30 goals in coastal regions. And so just to recap here, you can find this on our website, but again, it's a very simple application for seed funding and technical assistance for coastal nature-based solutions and 30 by 30 projects. Its applications due November 21st. We are looking to accelerate kind of mid-stage projects, and we explain what that means in the application. We are looking to support projects in California, Oregon, Washington, Hawaii, Alaska, and U.S. Pacific territories. Our eligibility is very wide-ranging, and so you can just take a look at that. And the project types, we are looking for coastal nature-based solutions, improving water quality, providing multiple benefits for people, nature, climate, and furthering the goals of 30 by 30, even though people might be framing it in different ways, but we are looking at restoration and protection and other effective conservation measures. And so when we work with our partners, what do our solutions with our partners look like? One example here is just working on a vernal pool restoration planning project and in partnership with California State Parks in San Diego, planning vernal pool and bluff restoration in South Carlsbad State Beach. And we've been helping with assessing vulnerability, planning what those needs are, and mapping out funding for that and proposals to secure funding. In addition, another example of wetland restoration that buffers against floods, stores carbon, supports biodiversity, supporting our partner Ninth Root to transform a degraded wetland habitat into climate resilient wellness space along a 1 mile stretch of shoreline in Oakland, and again, supporting with some back office administration, grant writing support, and other administrative functions. So we really are helping our groups advance their efforts on the ground, working shoulder to shoulder with our partners, communities, landowners to implement multi-benefit solutions that protect nature and increase access and reduce climate risk. A big strength of ours is helping unlock resources for local action, raising funds, redistributing funds and seed funds, advancing those projects, and offering coaching and technical assistance. We also incubate social entrepreneurs. We do physical sponsorship and support them with lots of hands-on guidance if desired, and sharing knowledge that moves the field, and tools and as well, and resources like our coastal funding database. A couple projects I wanted to highlight from past cohorts, just to kind of give you some ideas of what is happening out there at the local level that is still moving forward. Oregon Dunes is a restoration collaborative. We've been working with them the last 2 years, a group of different partners working to sorry, I just lost my screen here. Working together to revitalize some stewardship and restoration activities along the shoreline and dunes along a 6.5 acres on the Oregon coast. And we've been working with them on helping develop a partnership and fundraising strategy, providing some guidance on whether or not they should create their own nonprofit or if they should get a physical sponsor, thinking through how to engage the community as well as businesses in the region to support their effort, and identified grant opportunities and reviewed proposals with them. We're really thrilled that they've won a couple grants recently and been able to move forward with some partners and youth Corps crews with removal of invasives, as well as other youth activities. And it's just been really great project that's been moving forward. So that's one example of work that's happening right now and inspiring the local level. Another example, we've been working with our partner, Ariba South Coast, helping them move forward a project along a 6 mile stretch of creating a trail, Pescadero to the Sea Trail, which is a multi-benefit, multimodal trail that will restore coastal habitat, reduce flood risk, and as well as increase access. And with this project, we've been helping with some grant writing and project management, and helping with introduce donors, philanthropic donors, to move this project forward. And pleased to see one of our pre-proposals was submitted and invited for full proposal. So moving that forward as well. So positive directions at the local level. The last case study I wanted to present is a case study that is related to California's 30 by 30 effort. We've been working with the State Water Resources Control Board's Ocean Standards Unit, as well as the Central Coast Regional Water Board, and other agencies to develop a tool and a pilot in the Central Coast of all of the data necessary to put forward a nomination for a state water quality protected area. So this is one of the other effective conservation measures that could be put in place in California and is highlighted in the 30 by 30 plan. And there is a need for some tools that include information on the land side and outfalls, permits, to really highlight where new sites could be nominated, which a site hasn't been nominated since the 70s. And so there's quite a lot of enthusiasm to create some new water quality protected areas along the coast. And so we've been building this tool in the Central Coast. We helped secure some funding for expanding that tool, so it's going to be statewide. We've also been able to Department of Fish and Wildlife really liked the tool and has been asked us to kind of add in other data layers to help them with some of their mitigation efforts related to offshore wind and other projects. And so it's been really exciting to see this tool move forward and also support some nomination packages that were put in place, and also by the Monterey Bay Waterkeeper and California Coastkeeper has been looking at some of these efforts as well in terms of siting. And so we were supporting them with some data and information to achieve their goals related to water quality protected areas and increasing them, as well as improving enforcement. And the tool is also being leveraged by the water boards to inform the review of nominations. So that's really important aspect of the tool as well. So we hope to have a completed statewide tool early next year. We also have funding pending where we would hope to evaluate opportunities for new sites statewide, based on scientific and stakeholder input, as well as input from California tribes, and prepare some recommendations on how to nominate and where there's political will and science overlay of sites. So lots of exciting opportunities there related to state water quality protected areas. And as I mentioned earlier, site-based local coastal restoration and resilience projects. So we're really hopeful, and we see lots of opportunity in California, and also we had in Oregon. We've been having some great discussions hearing about the state of Oregon really thinking through how to get more resources at the state level. We know that Hawaii just passed a new initiative where they're able to secure a green fee for tourists to fund all of their coastal work. So really important opportunities are happening at the state and local level. So thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to talking more with our colleagues and answering some questions.
Thank you so much, Tegan. That was great. I'm going to go ahead and share screen. Okay, so now we are entering the Q&A portion of our webinar. But first, a special thank you to our speakers, Sylvia, Evan, Sri, and Tegan. We appreciate you taking the time to share your expertise with us. And we want to give our audience the opportunity to engage with you with questions. We are going to, the Q&A is open. I see a couple questions coming in, but I'd like to ask a few facilitated questions first just to get us started. So I'm actually going to stop sharing so we can see everybody's faces, which is a lot more fun than my slide there. And we have a couple questions. Let's start with this one to kick us off. And this is looking at that sort of federal level. So Sylvia, take us right back to the beginning here. How can we maintain support for coastal conservation and restoration at the federal level despite the challenging political environment? And you touched on several of these when you were speaking with your presentation, but if you want to surmise those, that would be great, and add any additions, and if others have thoughts as well.
Sure, thank you. I think old-fashioned, shoe leather, getting spokespeople from the communities that are being positively impacted by this. I don't mean to say real people, because that means that there's fake people, and that's not the case, but like people from the community who are benefiting, who are involved, who represent different sectors, sitting them to the decision makers, and thinking specifically about Congress. Now, granted, it's a very challenging environment, but just having people come in and meet with representatives, and just talking about the work and the benefits that it brings to the representatives' communities, just that good old-fashioned kind of outreach is really important. And I can't overstate enough the importance of local voices from different walks of life, who can, a really kind of authentic approach, storytelling. Those are all really good approaches, I think. It's intensive, but yeah, I still think it can make a difference, and I've seen it make a difference still.
Thank you, Sylvia. It makes me think of June Ocean Week, and a lot of times in the US, we have a lot of representation and a connection in Sacramento, and then over in DC at that time of year, where that connection with political leaders can be made, and those stories heard. Yeah. Any specific best practices that you've found that have really worked well to make that connection, to get in touch with leaders?
Again, speaking specifically, about Congress, and I'm certainly not an expert in this necessarily, but in my experience, it's, representatives will make time to listen to constituents. So that is part of their job. They do it. And again, it is resource intensive, but getting people from these communities out and in front of a representative or their staff, I think is really still a best practice.
That's great. Thank you.
And really kind of digestible information, digestible takeaways. Something like as you would explain the work to your grandmother, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. So. Mm-hmm. That sounds great. It's that communication, that simplification, so that the message is clear. Thank you. And would that same apply on the more state, local level? Opening that up to Evan, Teg, and others. Sari, if you'd like to comment. Is there an approach that you're found as a best practice for connecting with leaders on a more local level?
Yeah, I completely agree with Sylvia. It's all kind of the same approaches, getting legislators and leaders out to the sites, I think is kind of our approach. We work with a lot of different partners, and having to bring out the legislators to see the work on the ground is always the most effective. I also will mention something on the federal level, just because the Coastal Conservancy goes to DC every year to try to get appropriations to our federal partners that support our projects. And, in coastal California, it is hard because all of our congressmen and women, we don't need to change our approach or our language. Like, they agree with us and they support our work, right? But that's not the problem. It's the other counties that need to be changing the message, but all the coastal counties are pretty much Democratic in California. So, or districts, I should say, not counties. But anyways, yeah, I agree. Getting people out there, showing real life stories and how it's affecting actual community members.
And I would just add, like, California is the leader. We just passed the climate bond. There's so much opportunity here. I mean, I think the challenge is we're filling gaps from some federal cuts right now. And so what we're seeing in the landscape is some of the counties and other regions are also now starting to kind of lift up resources and solutions and think about how they can be owning their budgets more effectively. So, we've seen parcel tax pass in Santa Cruz County, for example. We're exploring that with another partner in another county, if that would be appropriate. And so I think that it's really going to take kind of all scales of resources to do the good work.
Thank you so much. That's great. I'm also curious about, based on what's happening in the political and funding landscape, how are your partners and grantees shifting and adapting their work? What trends are you seeing, or are there changing priorities? Like the projects are looking differently. Are you seeing that as funders in the space? And Evan, Sylvia, Sri.
I can get started with that. Yes,
Thank you.
to all three of your questions, to a certain extent. And we're kind of in the middle of evaluating and prioritizing a lot of the gaps that may merit like prioritized state investment, talking to our partners about what's the most urgent need right now, and seeing if there are mechanisms to somehow like backfilling or filling some of those. And then also communicating with our federal agency partners to inform them of impacts. And this is the risk that we're looking at, and trying to come up with something together. We are still in the middle of tracking changes to key data sets that we rely on, research that we rely on, monitoring and programs. And I think we're moving along. It's looking optimistic. There's still a lot of gaps that need to be filled. But I think we definitely see our grantees kind of trying to pivot and pivot quickly. Sometimes it's easy to do so, and some projects where, for example, like an implementation projects that's heavily reliant on federal funding, that might be a little bit harder. So things are getting a little bit pushed out, but we're trying to do our best to identify these gaps and prioritize.
That's great. And is there, from the practitioner side, if there's information or something that they can help to fill those gaps or inform any of this, what's the best way for them to share that information or communicate that?
So I think one of the ways that we've done is directly reaching out to our current partners and encouraging our partners to reach out to us. We had a council meeting item in June. It was a public discussion on where we are, what have we identified so far, which are the partnerships that we're looking at, and that was an opportunity for public to bring up or partners to bring up their end of the project discussion as well. I think we'll continue to do that at our council meetings, which are quarterly, and we invite our partners to bring these up as part of public comments, or find a way to reach us through our email list, or just to individuals too.
That's great. Thank you, Sri. And others, are you seeing any trends? How are your partners or grantees shifting and adapting their work? What are you seeing out in the field, Evan and Sylvia, or even Tegan from, that practitioner side too?
Yeah, I mean, I think I spoke to that a little bit in the funding survey, but just to kind of expand on that, I do think that groups are, shifting language. Maybe there's less of a priority in communicating, working if they had federal funding on environmental justice issues, and more focused on working on workforce development and working in communities for workforce development to do restoration. So it's just like thinking about how to reframe and being creative with how to keep your funding. So for example, we were able to, we play a role of a fiscal sponsor, and one grantee of EPA's was not allowed to receive funds because of their name of their organization kind of being a red flag for the administration. And so we are the fiscal sponsor for the grant. So just like being creative as partners to support each other, to like, even though it might be a real pain in the administratively, to just like get it done together. And that's just really feels good to be able to support each other to get that work done and be creative.
Thank you, Tegan. Sylvia or Evan, would you like to add? No. Okay.
I agree.
Thumbs up. Okay. Covered. Great job. And so looking at, you are public funders, some of you here, based in those who are based in California. What recommendations do you have for practitioners looking to fund restoration and conservation projects? So are there special resources? And we've put a couple links in our chat. So pushing people to grant opportunities and listings, understanding that these are rolling opportunities, some of them open. But are there some best practices, like always show up to that TA meeting where if you have an opportunity to present your project and just talk it through? Are there some things like that? Maybe Evan, you could speak to that.
Sure. Yeah. I would say that the Conservancy over the past 5 years has had a really big focus on reducing barriers to accessing our grants. And so I really encourage folks to look at that grants page, look at our technical assistance page. We have made like many different forms of how to understand the information. We have short videos, we have guidance documents that are very long, we have webinars that are recorded, we have like FAQs. So there's many different materials online that kind of describe our priorities. I'd say first and foremost, if you're going to go after a grant, you need to look at that agency's strategic plan. The whole, purpose that they're trying to achieve is all laid out there. And if you're in alignment with those strategic plan goals, then you likely will be a priority project. I will put a little caveat that while we've been focusing so much on creating all these new materials, we actually have realized that maybe it's a little overwhelming. If you go to our technical assistance page, it's just like this huge list of guidance documents, webinars, videos. And so right now we're working to revamp that page and our technical assistance program in general so that we can walk people through our support services a little bit better. So look out for that. We're also hoping to have like a focus group to help guide us to do a good job of this, because we're kind of like in a vacuum trying to figure out how to reduce barriers. So yeah.
That's great. Thanks, Evan. Super. And please feel free, speakers, to unmute yourself if you'd like to add any other thoughts. I do, and maybe we've touched on this a little bit, Shri, with like how to connect with you. Just thinking about how can researchers and practitioners get involved with the Ocean Protection Council blue carbon work specifically. If there's contact information there, if you'd like to share, I just wanted to make sure there was an opportunity to do that.
Yeah, my email is available, so please feel free to reach out to me. And like I mentioned, there are several data gaps, and one specifically, the Carbon Atlas, that's a public data set. And anyone doing soil carbon work can contribute, including anybody on the Zoom call. You can feel free to populate that database, and that would be available for broader CARBs use to improve statewide estimates. That said, please stay on our mailing list for upcoming funding opportunities, which would intersect with our blue carbon work too. OPC also funds research projects in addition to implementation and planning projects. So, I'd encourage applicants or interested folks in join our email list to be a great resource.
That's great. Thank you. That collective infusion of information is really impactful and much needed. We're almost at the end of our webinar, and I have a question that I wanted to ask all of you, which is, what opportunities do you see ahead? What are you most excited about for the field in 2026? And if you could each share that, we would love to hear from you, because that's our inspiration. It's something to look forward to. So Who would like to start? Over to you.
I'm happy to. I think it's pretty obvious from my slides that I'm very excited about these novel new techniques that are science-based for sea level rise adaptation. I'm really trying to track a lot of these ideas, and there's just like two new examples of them recently where the Army Corps and Marin County are thinking about this technique called pulse dredging, where you do water injection dredging during a storm event so that the storm waters can naturally bring sediment down to the shoreline and wetlands. There's these artificial headlands on the outer coast that some people are thinking about. So I'm just really intrigued by the creativity and science happening across the coast. I also am really excited about this big increase in tribal coordination and leadership. Just as an example, for our wildfire resilience program, the Prop 4 projects that are going in November, we're bringing 4 projects to our board and on November 20th, and 3 of them are going to tribes. So it just really is exciting. In addition to all the land back we've been working on, that's just having our tribal partners receiving direct grants leading these projects.
Thanks, Evan. Yeah, lots of hearts flying here. That's great. Love it. Who's next?
I can go next. I really wanted to echo what Evan said about the tribal partnerships. Love that. In addition, plus one, and I'm also excited about the launch of OPC's 2026 to 2030 strategic plan, which will be brought to the council this December. And hopefully, if, once that's approved, we're excited to support Californians in implementing our coastal habitat restoration and conservation goals. So looking forward to that in 2026.
That's great.
And-
Sylvia, Tegan. Go ahead, Tegan. Yes.
Yeah, I'll go. I unmuted faster, Sylvia. I'm really excited to support our next cohort, and see all the different projects. I mean, we've heard a lot about California, but we're looking for projects and have supported projects in Alaska and Oregon and Hawaii. And there's lots of opportunity in these other places, and we are going to be doing a little baby pilot in the Caribbean. And so I'm excited to work with new partners, and then also just see where our current partners, where their work goes. I mean, Ninth Roots project is 30% design right now. We're going into the next phase and getting it ready, helping with preparing the next phase of funding for their work along the MLK shoreline in Oakland, and getting that permitted and breaking ground at some point. And same with our work in San Diego with California State Parks. So it's just really exciting to see the progress every year, and knowing that you're playing a little piece of a role in helping move that forward.
Thank you, Tegan. And last but not least, Sylvia.
Oh, geez, last. And mine is more nerdy, but
That's okay.
I'm very excited about the advances we're making in understanding the ecosystem services provided by coastal habitats, and thinking specifically of wetlands, coastal wetlands. I saw Jess from Earth Economics on, so kind of really, because we work across the political spectrum, but really being able to articulate the benefits that wetland protection and restoration can provide in real tangible terms for communities is so important, and just really excited about how this field is really evolving quite well, and we're getting really great data to communicate that.
That's great. Thank you so much. I'm just going to share my screen because I have a special thank you to our speakers slide, which I don't want to miss. And we have contact information, which Marianne can pop into the chat. I think some contact information might already have been shared as we've been moving along. But you're invited by our speakers to reach out to them with questions if you would like to follow up. I know that we are at time. We do have a very quick poll that we would love to just launch. It has 4 questions. It's short and sweet. So once our chat has got, there we go. The poll is up. Speakers, please do not hit end poll. That will close the whole poll for everybody. But if the rest of our audience wouldn't mind quickly just giving us a few minutes of their time to share some feedback. We want to know if you've learned something new during this session. And we also want to know if you're currently working on implementing a Coastal 30 by 30 project. And if you are, where is it located? You can share that location with us. And then we're always looking for new and exciting topics to share with our community. So if you have thoughts on that, what do you want to learn about? What would you like to know? What experts are you excited about meeting? So we can engage with them, because this learning network is all about connecting our experts with our community, answering some really key questions there. We are at time. If you would like to stay on for a few more minutes, I am going to share just very quickly about our coastal funding database. So we, Coastal Quest, this is a space where you can find grant opportunities. We maintain a database of funding opportunities supporting coastal resilient programs and projects. And this database is actually updated very regularly. About 5 new opportunities are added each week. And then every other week we send out an email so you can sign up. We'll put that link in the chat if you haven't already. It's a great resource to learn about funding opportunities in your local area. So very quickly, just as we wrap up, next steps. Yes, the session has been recorded and we'll be posting the recording on our website, but also anybody who's registered will receive an email with a link. Go ahead and sign up for that coastal funding database bi-weekly email. Make sure that you're getting informed there. And then our Coastal Accelerator Cohort Seed Funding and Technical Assistance RFP is open. You can see more about it on our website. There'll be another link popped into our chat as I'm rushing through this. It is closing November 21st, so flag that in your calendar. And it is, as Tegan mentioned, it's a very manageable application. If you have questions, please reach out to us. Any suggestions, opportunities to collaborate, and be on the lookout for future webinars and resources. Ways to stay in touch. You can find us on social media. You can email our group collectively at coastalnbs@coastalquest.org. The link is at the bottom of this slide. And then myself, Sadie Waddington, and Mary Ann King, you can reach us directly with the email addresses posted. Great. All right, we're going to go ahead and close the poll. And I'm going to close out our webinar now. Thank you so much for joining us. If our speakers wouldn't mind staying on just for one moment, that would be great. And we're going to go ahead and invite you to leave the webinar session. Thank you so much for joining us today.